Hola y bienvenido to Thursdays for the Soul, a webinar series for the whole church. We faithfully focus on care and education for the people of God and create opportunities to digitally worship together as the whole of the United Church of Christ. From prayer, music, and psalms to interviews of key leaders and how-tos in congregational life. This series stays current to the relevant topics of the time and offers opportunities of connection in the wider church and in our communities. Together, we can bring our church and the world towards the world God imagines for all of us. Buen dia, good day. I am Reverend Roberto Choa, Minister for Ethnic Inclusion, Small and Rural Churches for the Faith, Education, Innovative, and Formation Ministry of the Justice and Local Church Ministries of the United Church of Christ, and your host. Thank you for being with us. Today, we are so honored to present a conversation with Franklinton Center of Bricks, North Carolina, with the Reverend Elly Mendez Angulo, Program Manager and Interim Executive Director, who will share the history, the UCC connection, and current vision of Franklinton Center to manifest a world where systematic oppression does not exist. But first, let me share some upcoming sessions that you might be interested in these coming weeks. On Thursday, August 4th, please join us as we present Faithful Abortion Access Then and Now. The Clergy Consultant Service was a nationwide network of getting people access to safe abortion services and resources before it was legal. Hosted by the Reverend Dr. Chris Davis, join alongside authors D.A. Dirks and Patricia Ralph to learn more about the extensive network of the time. Hear the testimony of Reverend Donna Schaefer about her work along the way, and Faith Choice Ohio Executive Director Elena Ramsey and Dr. Sherry Warren, the United Church of Christ Minister for Gender Justice, will speak on ways people of faith can show up now that we look towards mounting state-led barriers to abortion access. And on Thursday, August 18th, Thursdays for the Soul presents Accessible to All Churches and Disabilities Justice. The United Church of Christ adopted the Accessible to All A2A covenant as a denomination in 2005 as part of our commitment to disabilities justice. Barriers to accessibility are both physical and attitudinal. Disability justice intersects with UCC's commitments to racial, economic, gender, sexual identities, just peace, and environmental justice. So join representatives of the UCC Disabilities Ministries Board for practical resources for what UCC members and congregations can do to create a more just world for all. This webinar is part of a special series of Thursdays for the Soul webinars focused on 12 Just World Covenant programs in the United Church of Christ, which is held on the third Thursday of each month. And these are one of the programs will be featured. To learn more, please go to www.ucc.org, Just World Covenant. As usual, you can visit UCC.org or any of our social media platforms to find out about upcoming sessions like this. Friends, beloved, if these conversations move you, if what's offered here helps enhance your ministry or your soul, please consider donating towards the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. That's UCC to 41444. Your prayerful and financial support helps programs like this in the essential work of the United Church of Christ. Gracias, and thank you. Now for today's program, a conversation with Franklinton Center at Bricks with the Reverend Elly Mendez Angulo. The Reverend Elly Mendez Angulo is a proud Afro-Rican who is an outspoken, theologically progressive Christian. She serves as Program Manager and Interim Executive Director of Franklinton Center at Bricks, which allows her the privilege of engaging with the works of local, national, and international justice advocates on many issues. but always particularly that of race. She is excited to be able to engage with youth of all ages using the history of the site, Franklinton Center, to exercise the lived reality of what it means to do and be about justice. Since 2017, she has been serving on the board of Parity and is proud to offer glitter ashes to all who feel moved. She is a committed queer woman of faith who loves and serves the divine. Having responded to the call to minister and serve all of God's creation, beginning with their own home. You are invited to follow her personal journey at www.CHRUELLY.com. Elly is also, like me, a graduate from Andover Newton Theological School and has been with Franklinton Center at Bricks since 2009. And if it doesn't seem obvious, I consider her a dear friend, a dear sister, a dear sojourner for good trouble. Elly, get down. So glad that you are here.
Ay, buenas, Roberto Ochoa, and to the United Church of Christ, I say thank you for inviting me.
How are you today?
I am looking out windows at fields and fields of green grass and land that is being cultivated even as we speak and being prepared to be to have the soil changed once more into a breeding ground for fresh food for our community. I'm so excited by the work of the land. It's not my work, it's the land that keeps working.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. So tell us a little history. For those that may not be familiar with Franklinton Center at Bricks, can you give us a brief history of its legacy and its importance?
Well, Roberto, it's always hard to figure out where to start telling a story. When we talk about Franklinton Center at Bricks, we're talking about a legacy that, depending on who you ask, starts either in 1871 or 1895. Do you have time for me to share lots of that story?
Well, can you give us the reading version?
Okay, I'll give you a condensed version.
Oh, the Cliff Notes.
The Cliff Notes? Okay, that's even more condensed. Let me think. I'll start by saying that according to something that we found recently in microfilm, dated October 27, 1866, we found a notice about land being made available. It says notice, the undersigned offer for sale their farm on Fishing Creek containing 1,000 plus acres. 800 are in cultivation, of which about 600 are in cotton. It has a large dwelling house and good framed cabins to accommodate 80 hands with their families. It has excellent framed stabling for 50 mules and barns to hold 2,600 barrels of corn. It has a very large gin house and a good screw, and a platform on the W&W Railroad, not more than 400 yards from the gin house. The whole farm is in a high state of improvement, and the present crop may speak for its productiveness. Cotton will be taken in payment. Address the undersigned at Whitaker Station, Edgecombe County, North Carolina, Garrett and Company. So in the 1800s, late 1800s, when the war between the states was going on, there was a lot of strife going on, and a guy fell in love with the land that I'm standing on now. And that begins the 1895 history. But in 1871 starts this other piece, which is the Franklinton Christian College, a bunch of Black church leaders. Each felt called to the ministry of their congregations, and they sat down and said, you know, this white denomination of which we are a part, they seem to get access to education in a way that we don't have access. And so these Black church pastors got together and said to their churches, can you tie an extra dime towards the purchase of what will be a school for us? And so they, by tithing each a dime, in 1871, were able to create Franklinton Christian College in Franklinton, North Carolina.
Wow.
Imagine if we did that today. By 1895, over here on this land that I'm sitting on, there was this other thing happening, which is that land that I spoke about, that the Garrett Plantation. There was a guy who came from New York City, General Estes, and he fell in love with the land and decided that he would like to become a farmer once the war between the states was over. And so he borrowed money from a wealthy widow woman, a white, wealthy widow woman, and was able to purchase land. He wasn't able to become the farmer that he thought he had envisioned. And slowly, year after year, he found himself having to return the land to her possession because he could not make a go at being a farmer. I imagine that he had not taken into account what slave labor really now was going to cost him in paid labor. Because when we talk about the 80 hands, cabins to accommodate 80 hands with their families, we're talking about the slave quarters on that land. So he wasn't able to do it without them. By the 1954, the Franklinton Christian College and what became which became Franklinton Center, and this other institution, which was on the land that I'm in, the Brick School, the Joseph Keesby Brick Agricultural, Industrial, and Normal School, which had become the Brick Junior College, which became the Brick Rural Life School, which became the Brick Tri-County Public School, all created under the idea of educating Blacks that came through the realistic, real, problematic disenfranchisement of their people. All of these institutions were no longer making a go at earning enough to continue to be sustainable. And so by 1954, the AMA deeded approximately 160 acres of the brick property to Franklinton Center. And there at that moment, we become Franklinton Center at Bricks. Neither institution giving up its identity. So when we say Franklinton Center at Bricks, that is our proper name because it is a reminder that we have a legacy that starts in both of those stories. It's the convergence of both stories. Right now, in front of you, I had invited the team to show you what it feels like to drive along the roads getting you to the campus. Imagine that you leave the city, you leave the town, the airport is nowhere near you, there's nothing around you for miles and miles but trees and nature, sometimes a bear, oftentimes badgers, and lots of nature. There's some of the richest farmlands around you, and yet there seldom can be found a store where you can purchase food. Most of the stores that you see in this community are fast, convenient, gas stations. And so that is the community that we serve. It is a community where inside those trees, I know what families sort of live in each of those pockets. There's many people who are wonderful and do so much to survive and sustain, but the access to food is a moment of injustice for them today. That's the land.
So talk a little bit about the UCC connection with Franklinton Center.
The UCC connection is really the AMA story. It's that the American Missionary Association.
I'm sorry, just the AMA, for those that may not know what AMA stands for.
Yeah, the AMA is a really interesting, unique thing. It's part of what we come out of as UCCers. The AMA is the American Missionary Association. The American Missionary Association back in the day was this historic thing that was doing justice in a very deep way according to their understanding of what justice looked like. Today, we see the problems and we forget that in their day, they were the United Church of Christ. They are what birthed us in a lot of ways. We are a justice-oriented denomination because we come through the lens of the American Missionary Association. The American Missionary Association in 1954, when it gave up the land that is now Franklinton Center at Bricks, historically, that institution, the AMA, were responsible for creating schools for Blacks coming out of slavery. Most of the rural life schools came out of the AMA. Most of the industrial or agricultural or normal schools for Blacks came out of the AMA. Most of those schools in Appalachia that are educating whites, poor whites, came out of the AMA. Those hospitals like Rydell Hospital in Puerto Rico came out of the AMA, just like the Indian boarding schools came out of the AMA. And so when we talk about the history of systemic oppression, we have to sort of sit in the discomfort of its both justice to the best of our understanding in a moment of history, and it did so much harm. But that's us.
So how did it evolve in the civil rights movement? How did that evolve? I understand the Franklinton Center had a very strong role in developing civil rights, especially in the South.
Yeah, we're this really scary place to many people. So what is now Franklinton Center at Bricks is this place that was and still is in many ways a hidden gem for the community that knows about it. I was recently talking to the son of the last director, possibly the only, of the Brick Rural Life School. He was born on our campus. He's now 83 and he was born here. And he says, well, you know, there's a name that they used to call us, and my dad, he wore it like a badge of honor. And I said, what was the name? And he said, N ... ER, heaven.
Wow.
He said this was a place where we could come and be whole. Whatever they said about us, on this land, we were whole. And he said that's the history of Franklinton Center at Bricks, which is the name you give it, and I still think of it just as Bricks. He says it's a place where we could come and be whole. And so he says, back in the day, that these elders would gather and say that there was a conversation happening anywhere in the area where Blacks were going to go and take over a counter. What is now the United Church of Christ would invite Black and white members, pastors, to come on the soil and learn what it meant to be in relationship with each other, to do the work of social justice around issues of race. And so I remember recently speaking to this other member of the community who's an educator now in Raleigh, and he says, you know, the first time I came to North Carolina was the scariest time in my life. I said, what do you mean? He said, he was a child. He was about 7 or 8, and he came here. He's a white man member of the United Church of Christ. He came here with his dad, who was an ordained pastor in our denomination, who said, get in the car. We're going as a family to go and meet the kings in North Carolina. And so in the mind of this child, he was going to go and meet kings and queens. And it was his first experience of meeting Black people. So he just thought Black people were kings and queens. He never understood that the name King was actually Hudson King, who was the director of what had become Franklinton Center at Briggs. What he also remembers is his brother, who was a teenager, threatening to run away from home, saying that there was no way that he was coming, because he just knew that if we got there, when we arrived, we're going to die. His older brother felt that his dad was taking them to a place where they were going to step into the reality of possibly dying for the causes that his father believed in, which looked like justice for Black people. So two very different stories. Now, the mother, I've met her since, talks about, we came to the center and we learned what a demonstration looked like, what we as white people could do to stand in solidarity with our brethren, what we could do to disrupt the system. These are words that we use today, but in those days, disruption looked like being willing to take the count, to take the brunt end of the hose when the fire department decided that it was time to throw water on a community of Black activists.
Wow.
And so that's the soil that we live in. We live in a reality where historically, we've always been part of the movement in all of these really strange ways. I've heard from our previous director, Vivian Lucas, remembering coming here as a child to learn the movement songs. And then today I get to sit here and I have the privilege of listening to the movement folk of today, writing new movement songs and envisioning new ways to express gratitude to the soil that is giving them a soft landing pad in the midst of all their frustrations and anger. There's a sound that I look forward to every year. My partner, my fiance, is part of a group called Spirit House. And when they come on our soil, they are those, I keep telling her, I don't understand what y'all do for a living, but they're those witchy Black women and witchy Black men who have got the gift of calling on the divine in all of the ways that the divine exists in all of us. And when they get together, they do this thing that they call murmurations. And it sounds like heartbeats and humming. And when you hear it the first time, it seems to come from everywhere at one time. And there's this moment in the creation of the sound that they are making with their bodies. It's not musical instruments, where no matter where you are on campus, you want to go to where they are. So I tend to walk away from my computer and, don't tell the world around me, but that's why I'm not at my desk at those moments. I just want to get close to that breath of the divine breathed together in community. Those are the movement songs of today. And we get to hear them still on this soil.
Amen. Amen. And so one thing that I am really I was struck by my visits to Franklinton Center that I've been honored to have, is the intersectionality of justice issues that sometimes that we forget are intertwined. Environmental issues, gender identities, food, that's a hum, like a beehive there. Can you tell a little bit more of what it means to be part of that today for the community that you serve?
I say it feels strange to be in it and among it, because you're not, I always knew what it meant to live in a food desert. I'll just give you examples. I lived in New York City. I've lived in Hartford, Connecticut. I've lived in big cities. And when you're in a big city and you're in the middle of a food desert, it looks like the grocery store, big chain names are not readily available. What you have accessible is the bodega, the corner deli. And when you want fruits and vegetables, you just go to the bodega or you go to the corner deli and you figure it out. And you make do a lot of the time. And then probably once a month, you make it to the real grocery store and you get a large bulk amount of the things that you need to sustain you. Well, I'm living on some of the richest soil in the United States. North Carolina has got some of the richest soil in the US. And it is 16 miles, 13 miles to the nearest grocery store, proper grocery store, properly stocked grocery store. That's food insecurity. When we talk about living in a community that is so far removed from so many things that some of us find so normal, it means that when I am looking for a church to go visit, there are about 130 within about 25 miles. There is one that is Christian and welcoming.
When you say welcoming.
Yeah, of me as both a Black woman and me as a Black woman who is in the process of marrying a Black woman. There is one that is Christian. The other is UCC. And while they are wonderful, my Trinitarian self just, I need the Trinity. I need to talk about God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit. And they don't have that language like I'm accustomed to feeling it.
You mean Unitarian Church?
The one here. And so it's just a little bit different. And what does that mean to our local community? It means that when I get phone calls from the local schools and they're wondering about, can you possibly, because now I have ins, right? Now they've met me a little bit because of the work that we did that I'll tell you about in the midst of COVID. Reverend Elly, can you tell me resources, because I have children that are coming out to me that are scared of what will happen when their parents tell their pastors.
Okay.
Can you give me resources that I can share with parents that are calling me because they've heard that this is something that their child is thinking that they might be? When that convergence of realities exists, both we're Black, we're people of color, we live in a rural environment, which means not a lot of options, not a lot of resources, and I am dependent on my family to be my family, because if not, I will die. That becomes real here. In the midst of COVID, we opened up the center for the school system, and we were offering them things like drive-up internet access, offering COVID vaccinations, COVID testing, masks. We functioned as a learning pod. That gave us access to educators. We did a pop-up internet cafe. We served food. We opened up our farmland and allowed community to access the things that were coming out of it, right? We did all of these things, but what we found was that if we weren't intentional about reaching out to those four, whatever queerly they identify as members of our community, to tell them that there was access to food, they weren't getting access to the food. because most of the groups and most of the places where we connect in this community are in church. And if they're too out, if they're unable to hide, then this was a particularly dangerous time to be a member of the community. I know people who just chose, I can't tell them, because if I tell them, I've now lost my job, I will lose access to housing, I will lose access to food, and if I'm out on the streets, and then what, right? It put an already, skewed or messed up system into a state of disassociation. I don't know what I would call it. We've been a mess. That's.
So how have you been helping respond to these challenges yourself, or is there a group or a community or
resources?
That you've been able to get resources around to be able, or how can people help you? That's typical of dealing with rural congregation, rural life, especially if one is queer. It can be challenging, but not only that, but just other services. Like, what happens when someone needs to go to the doctor? Medical needs, those things. How do you help your community, or how does Franklinton Center help the community?
How we help is by serving in any capacity that they need. So there's the things that happen that we know immediately offhand that we can respond. Food insecurity, we knew that those numbers were going to increase in the midst of COVID. We are grateful for the United Church of Christ and its continued support of our Just Food program, which allowed us to pay for farmers to plant seeds into our soil, to pull the plants out, to help us prepare them, allowed me to be paid to make phone calls to every church and every community center and every community activist and every queer person that I could think of, that allowed more than 470 tons of food to go out into the community. So we're grateful to the work of the United Church of Christ. What it takes to do that is everything. You just heard. In order to farm, you have to have land, you have to have water, you have to have soil that can be turned over, you have to have the right equipment, you have to have the right staffing.
What type of crop? What type of crop?
Oh, so in the fall, we garden. We have this beautiful tradition over the last few years where we've been putting together a fall garden, which goes all the way into late winter, early spring. And those crops are usually the best because they're the collard greens, the cabbage collards, everything that is green and roughagey. It grows and it doesn't need a lot of help and it doesn't need a lot of tending. It needs a lot of prayer. And we're grateful to our master gardener for his continued prayers over the land. He tells me all the time, when he comes on the land, he says he prefers fall gardens to any other gardens. But one of the things that he does as he's cleaning is I watch him and he's praying. Now, what his prayers are, not my business. What he calls the divine, not my business. But I know that at 5 o'clock in the morning, that man is already out there and he's praying over some stuff that I'm sure needs it more than I need sleep.
Any other crops?
Yeah, right now we have 10 acres of yams and sweet potatoes that are planted on the front part of the campus. And that is a partner relationship. We had land that we have that we are able to offer, but because we don't have the funding readily available, we were able to partner up with a group called Kanita Family Life Center. And they are an amazing bunch of people that have been doing work around farming and land and food insecurity for years. And so Richard Joyner, Reverend Richard Joyner, said, if you give me access to the land, I will give you access to my farmer. And I will reach out to my farmer and figure out if he would be willing to give you access to his equipment. And so this farmer shows up on a Saturday and he cultivated the soil, he turned it all over. And then we thought it was just a conversation that we would be having in a week and that he just stopped there, which we were already grateful for. And he said, no, the community is going to be hungry. And so he planted sweet potatoes. And so the idea is that sometime soon we'll be able to cultivate sweet potatoes and call on the community and say, you are welcome, feast. And I know that might sound counter our ideas around, teach a man to fish and he'll fish. Listen, some people don't have access to enough land to feed everyone that needs feeding in their households. And some people don't have access to the seeds that are necessary to start the stuff to growing. And so if we can help in any way, then that's what we're going to do. And so we are also able to say to people, hey, did you know that if you take this green onion, these long green onions that you buy at the store, and you put them in water for a couple of days, they start growing tendrils. And if you put them in soil, they keep growing. And then you don't throw them away and you have plenty and you don't have to keep spending money on those. So we did a lot of that type of education in the midst of COVID. Let's figure out how to do this.
That sounds like blessed collaboration, right?
Listen,
at its best.
At its best, what we learned is that God really has given us all that we need. We just have to remember how to use it.
Being innovative.
That's right.
And as I understand, most rural communities have to be innovative, creative, to be able not only to survive, but to thrive for one another.
To thrive. And I've watched another thing that I think we've figured out. I don't want to just survive. I'm tired of the survival game. We've done a lot to survive.
Amen.
Franklinton Center at Bricks has been on a survival mode since 1871. Right? In 1871, when those Black mamas and papas got together and tithed a dime each. In 1895, when that wealthy widow woman donated the land, we were always about survival. What I'd like to begin the process of doing is figure out how we thrive. How do we take the legacy of our ancestors, which is so rich, so juicy, so thick? How do we allow it to thrive, to feed and nurture us and to feed and nurture them? And when I say them, I'm saying it to those white people who have really good intentions, those wealthy people who have really good intentions. I want them to be nurtured by this land too. And I think you have access to it. I think so do I. We just have to figure out how we tap into it. Survival is not the thing anymore. It's thriving. And thriving for me includes planning for the party. How many times have you been told?
Planning for the party. Did you say planning for the party?
P-A-R-T-Y. Everybody's always talking about, we're going to do this in order to help us get to the next hurdle. We're going to do this so that we can get to the next point. We're going to do this and then God, and we're going to do this and because the Lord, and we're going to do this because the Holy Spirit. We're going to do this because the divine. The divine didn't just intend for us to be surviving. God gave us more than enough so that we would thrive. And so what that means is I want to put together a playlist. What is the music that I want to hear at the end, at the party, at the next innovation moment, at the next technological advance? What is the thing that I want there? What's the food? What is the yummy, the thing that makes us feel good that we're going to get at that later point? That's the part that I'm excited about. So,
Yes,
Roberto,
yes.
What's your plan for the party?
I love it. And you all have, I think, whatever you said is you have a great welcoming center, for gatherings and conferences. You have a great museum, and you have places around you like the graveyard, that sacred graveyard that you all nurture so much. The history that one can learn, that I've been able to learn about things that we don't get in textbooks, especially as Northerners.
Yeah, there's
You have
plenty
opportunity.
there's plenty that you can come here. People ask all the time, Elly, what can we do? They ask Wayne, who's our chef. Wayne, what can we do? How can we help? How can we serve? And the sort of the historic response, the pastoral response is keep us in your prayers. And that is a deep level of truth. I covet prayers. I beg you, I plead with you to continue to keep us in your prayers. I also remind you that prayer doesn't mean stand still and do nothing.
Right.
And so things that you can also do in line with your prayers is listen. When other people are talking about Franklinton Center at Bricks and its history, listen, pull out your ear and listen really, really hard. Right now, there is this movement to create a new book. There's a book that's in the process of being written. And the tentative title for now is called The Fifth Stream of the United Church of Christ. It is an acknowledgement of the United Church of Christ can't exist without these Black mamas and papas that donated a dime each. Those are the Black Southern churches. That is the tradition on which the United Church of Christ is funded. But we oftentimes forget, and it's not been included in the history books. When you hear them talk about that book, remember to pick it up. Remember to read it. Remember to digest it. Share the information. Whenever you hear about Franklinton Center at Bricks, and it's positive. Not those other times when they tell you, oh, the buildings are so old. Listen, they come from 1895, some of them. Of course they're old. But we also have some new ones that are from 2007. But share the information about our story. Listen, share, pray. And also donate. Franklinton Center at Bricks exists not only when you have an event here, which we are excited to welcome you here at Franklinton Center at Bricks whenever you'd like. Call us. We're already open. We're back to being in community, but we take donations all the time because we exist all the time. And what existence looks like is internet, bills that you got to pay, electricity, running water, all things that are important to keep in line and in motion. A farm that's over 244 acres, buildings that include historic ones from 1895 and new ones built in 2007, a fully functional dining hall that has a very amazing chef that can do Southern cooking like no other. Listen, there have been songs and odes written to Chef Wayne's food. All of that to say, remember us. We have groups that come here like it's part of their religious tradition. For them, it's important. It's an important pilgrimage en route to success for the year, is to stop here and breathe here and land here and know that they will be fed, that they will be nurtured, that they will be loved on, that our staff will hug on them when it's safe. All of those things are important to the movement, and that the party is being planned and they're helping plan it and they're being part of it. So we invite y'all to consider us when you're planning your retreats, your conferences, your events. We do everything from the little party to the big Southern Movement Assembly is hosting a group here on campus in the fall, over 100 people. they're going to have a tent because COVID is still rampant and we want to be safe.
So tell us a little bit about what the vision is for the future of Franklinton Center. What is, and how is it governed? Is it governed by a board of directors? How?
We do. We have a board of trustees that are a fully functional board of trustees. That means that they are a giving board. They contribute to the mission of the church, of the denomination, and of the center. And I say the denomination because many of them are still also part of the United Church of Christ. We have members on our board and leaders on our board that are not part of the denomination, that simply love the center through its history and have chosen to sit on our board for that in that way. I would say that the mission of Franklinton Center at Bricks is to provide a nurturing home to local, national, and global programs and organizations seeking liberation. If you're not seeking liberation, what are you seeking?
Right.
I think that I know that as a 501c3, we're transforming the world through nature, history, food, hospitality, and education. If it's happening in our community and there is a tie-in for us, someone is calling to say, hey, can y'all possibly consider this? When our children have been experiencing very large numbers of death in the midst of the COVID crisis, we have gotten phone calls, can you come and do a grief circle with our children? When people are finding that the children in the school system have questions that have need of other people outside of the school system to help answer them, we've been part of it. We create civic engagement and social action courses for the local community. We are here. We are here all the time. We have groups that have been here for years.
And you have an amazing museum. Talk a little bit about that museum, because the gems, you're talking about gems, the history of the people, especially African descendant people in that area is amazing, things that we don't hear about.
Yeah, so we have this really complex history and complex connections to churches, groups, and institutions because of our history. And so the Brick Museum and Library Project is the recipient of this thing called the African American Historic Preservation through the Afro-Christian Legacy Project. And that is a group, that is a project whose real focus is on reaching out to these rural churches, Afro-descendant churches, churches that come out of that 1871 story, to ensure that their history is kept safe, is not forgotten. As many of them, we know that our denomination is an aging population. And as people change and it impacts the life of the church. And so we'd like not to forget where we came from. And so right now, this year, actually in a week, is our annual Franklinton Center Day. It is an annual day of remembrance of the center and the legacy of the center. And it is the day when the fruits are collected, meaning that people tithe into the mission of Franklinton Center at Bricks. That's happening next week, Saturday. And one of the things that they are going to do, and they've been doing for the last few years, is we are taking in a new collection. At Franklinton Center Day, we will be taking in a new collection, and it is that of Reverend Joseph M. Copeland, who is a UCC pastor, who has shared manuscripts and videos and cassettes of his sermons over the course of his lifetime and legacy as a church leader. And so those will be coming into the center. We have had the Hargett collection that has been housed here for the past, since 2019. We also have materials from Reverend Linda Jaramillo, who was the Justice and Witness Ministries leader while it was still called the Justice and Witness Ministry for the denomination. And these are people who loved the center in a way that was so real that they felt it important that materials of theirs be housed here. And those are collections that are very important. The Hargett collection, Reverend Dr. Hargett was the first Black pastor of a church in Hawaii, to pastor a church in Hawaii. And he was a member of what became the United Church of Christ. And his son was a member of the United Church of Christ.
So, and that's open house, and that, what's the date again?
It will be on Saturday, next week, Saturday, August 6th. It is a historic date. It is always the first Saturday of August, no matter what. It has been that way for a very long time now. And so, yeah, there will be an open house. There will be amazing speakers and presenters. There will be the official receipt of the new collection will be taking place. There will be food. We can't do anything ever without remembering that it is important that we feed ourselves and nurture our bodies. And so there will be walking that happens on the ground. We will be sharing the history and the legacy. And if you are not here, you missed it. But go on our website and you should be able to find out a little bit more about it. We're going to have some amazing times will be had during that day.
Well, it's been an amazing time talking to you, but I'm curious, como una Afro-Rican, how did you get involved with Franklinton Center? How did you get connected and that love of yours? Because I know you love the center.
I do. You know how I mentioned that lady named Reverend Linda Jaramillo? Yeah. I think it was around 2008. Reverend Linda Jaramillo tasked the what was at that time called the Council for Hispanic Ministries to show up at Franklinton Center at Brooks. At that time, she said there are things that are happening with the Latinos in North Carolina, and y'all don't have any idea about them. She said, there's a new church pastor in Chapel Hill, he's Latino, and y'all don't know him yet. There's this stuff going around, food insecurity and farm justice needs with Latinos, and y'all are not clued into it. And, we got a nice charge to go out and meet these people, be in community, be the community that God called you to be. And we came to Franklinton Center, and that drive that you saw at the beginning, for those of you who were able to see it, or those of you who are able to see, imagine it happening to a younger Elly, maybe a sassier Elly, possibly an Elly that at the time was working in corporate America, in her proper New England Black suit, with her high heels and her brooch, and her hair tied securely back in its proper place. And imagine that you fell asleep on a long bus ride from the airport for 2 hours. And suddenly, for me, I had this moment where my body woke up, and I didn't know where I was. I knew I was in a moving vehicle, but I just turned to the person who was driving, who's Mr. Clevester, and I said, "Sir, are we there yet?" And he was like, "We're almost there." And he started laughing, and I said, "I know we're almost there, but I want to get there already." He said, "So you've been here before?" I said, "I've never been here before, but my body knows it's coming home." And he just started laughing. And by the time that we drove over the first bridge, and I said, okay, I know we're very close. How much further? Maybe I can just walk there. I felt like he was taking too long. And he just started laughing and he said, girl, just wait it out. And I got here and by then I had taken my shoes off because I just knew I was going to have to jump out of this little van and run to get where I was going. And I didn't know, I had never been here before, but I knew I had to get there quickly. And so I have my shoes in my hand and he takes a moment and he's going to open the door. And by the time that he extended his hand, I was in the process of jumping out of the van. And he said, don't step on the soil without your shoes on. And I said, why not? And he said that because you're standing on sacred ground, on holy ground, on land that is anointed. And if you step on it and you're not ready, the changes will come and you won't know why it happened. And I said, I'm ready for whatever God has for me. And I jumped and put both feet firmly planted on the soil and took myself for a walk. And by the end of the weekend, I was on the back part of the property, along the river, with a bunch of people who are our ancestors in this Latinx movement building thing that we do. And when it was time to come back, because we're supposed to get on our bus, people are coming from the campus to alert us that they're waiting, that we're running late to get us back to the airport. And I said, it's fine, because I'm not going. I'm not going. You could tell my mother I'm not going. I'm not going anywhere. And by the time that I made it to the front and it's time to get in the bus, in the van, my mom is standing there and she's looking very cross and she's got the very Puerto Rican, you know, if anyone has ever met my mother, the very Puerto Rican hands on the hips, sassy mom look on her face. And she says, get on the bus. And I said, Mom, I'm not going. And she said, Pastora Elly, montate, get on the bus. And I said, well, you know, we're just going to be late. I'll call a taxi because I didn't pack. And she said, I'm your mother. I've known you all your life. I packed for you. You're preaching next weekend. Get on the bus right now. Yeah. And Mr. Clevester helped me onto the bus. And he said, listen, you have been changed. You have been affected. God has touched you. Don't worry. If God has touched you, you will always be connected to Franklinton Center at Bricks. And I let everyone know if there's anything I can do to be of service, call me. And within a year, I got a phone call about a board meeting. And by 2017, I was like, I'm going to live there. By then, I had been coming for summers, and my love for Franklinton Center runs very deep. And I take a walk on its soil whenever I can. Now, because my sense is all the way back intact, I usually wear shoes.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And before we leave, just a question. It's like, if a congregation or a nonprofit, you know, are interested, how can they contact you to partner with Franklinton Center on the project? How can they contact you for partnering?
Go on our website, Franklinton Center, spelled Franklinton, Center, CENTER, @ bricks, BRICKS.org. Go on our website, click on the button that says contact us, you know, or something along those lines. Find where it has a list of staff people. There's only a full-time staff of 2, and you're seeing one of them right here. And send me an email. And I'm happy to sit down and talk with you and figure out what we can do to be in partnership or be intentional about developing a relationship that is sound and healthy.
Thank you. Querida hermana, so good to see you. So good. Yeah, it's a great day. Thank you for sharing about Franklinton Center at Bricks and for everything for the wider church. And to the audience out there, I hope this has been a program
that you were able to enrich your souls as I've been enriched and blessed. So, Pastora Elly, can you close us out with a benediction?
Love, all that we need is here. Gift of the divine, each of you, each of us, and the land. All that we need, freedom, priceless, precious, beloved, godly, and a gift of the divine. All of it is here. Amen. Amen.
If you were moved by this conversation, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry or has nurtured your soul for the journey, please consider donating to the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help to provide programs like this, which are an essential part of our ministries in the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed on your journey and know that you are not alone. We are holding you in prayer. Amen.